Old Grognard says, "This is my take on the Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition Dungeon Master shortage." Let me give you some backstory. My experience with 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons began in 2014. My kids won a Halloween costume contest at a comic book store and used the prize money to buy a 5e starter set. They then came to me and asked if I would run the game for them. This thought was terrifying and yet exciting at the same time. The terrifying part was that the last time I had played was 16 or 17 years ago in a much earlier edition. I had given up all hope of ever playing D&D or any RPG back in the late 90s, when life forced me to grow up and give up anything that wasn't part of the grown-up world. Yet, here was an opportunity to not only do something I thought I would never get to do, but also to pass it on to my kids. Of course, we started playing, and we got the 3 core rulebooks for Christmas that year. I really enjoyed the simplicity of the system, and that the difficulty ratings for tasks were similar to D6 Star Wars. It then went downhill. So here I am going to begin explaining what I think the DM shortage is caused by, and it comes down to rules and culture. Part 1. Rules. We played with the rules in the basic game. I looked forward to books that would be published, so I could get new things to challenge my players. Characters had the land vehicles skill. I looked forward to vehicle combat. The DMG mentioned airships. I looked forward to rules for epic air battles. I even hoped that one day those rules would evolve into, just maybe, rules for spell jamming. But instead of giving the DM tools to challenge the players, they gave the players tools to challenge the DM. The DM already has a challenging job. If we use the concept of boredom versus stress, this moves the slider towards stress. If this isn't bad enough, the powers that characters gain are often exception-based. First edition AD&D had exception-based powers for some NPCs. Those NPCs were called gods. The problems an exception-based system causes are many, especially in a vaguely worded system that doesn't give examples of what different powers and such do. Exception-based powers make it where each character is playing by their own rule set. When you add more character levels and more players at the table, this only gets worse. The Dungeon Master has to take all of this into account. This adds to prep time. I've more than once said that in 2E you could prep for hours and run the game for days. In 5E you prep for days and then you're able to run the game for hours. This might be a bit of an exaggeration, but you get the point. And there goes the slider. There's more on the rules side, but that's the 2 big ones that I can think of. Part 2. Culture. When I started running 5e for my kids, it was back when most D&D players still played 3.5. No one played 5e on YouTube, Stranger Things hadn't done its thing yet, and most TTRPG players were still in the basement and hadn't come out yet. Most of what I have observed boils down to not just a lack of respect for the DM, but the culture sanctioning players actively disrespecting the role of the DM and the human being behind it. I blame the first cultural shift I noticed on video games. Now, I'm not saying video games are bad. I'm literally going to college to get a degree in making video games. What I am saying is that for a lot of folks entering the hobby, video games are the frame of reference that they use to understand TTRPGs, with the DM being the meat computer that runs the game. One of the side effects of this is that there is a large chunk of the player base that has little tolerance for the DM making up their own content, changing rules, or banning player options. They have the video game mindset and have a certain idea of what the game is. If the Dungeon Master does their own thing, then it isn't the game to them. How dare the meat computer do something like that? You see the propagation of this idea with the term homebrew being used for making your own content. Like you made bathtub gin and you're condensing it through a radiator and you're going to give your players lead poisoning. If WotC posted some of their ideas anonymously on Reddit, without being able to hide behind being official content creators, the Redditors would tear them to pieces in the comments. Official doesn't automatically equal good. The second big shift is the concept of responsibility versus authority. A surefire way to make someone unhappy is to give them responsibility and not give them any authority to guarantee that they have a chance of meeting that responsibility. The culture gives conflicting messages that prove this point, like,
the DM is just one of the players, but it's the DM's job to make sure everyone has fun. And the DM isn't supposed to have fun. It's their job to run the game.
People mention the adversarial DM and how horrible they are, but no one mentions the adversarial player. This is because the adversarial player is normalized in this culture. How many YouTube channels are dedicated to things like,
use this combination to cause 500 points of damage per turn,
or something like that? What if the DM doesn't want to be the punching bag for your combo of the week and just wants to run a good game? Players don't care because the culture has told them that you, the DM, are the meat computer to run the video game, and you better make sure the players have fun. The last point about the culture is how it is said that no D&D is better than bad D&D. But I think most of the time they should be saying toxic D&D, where there's a lot of unhealthy, cringy stuff going on that leads to people sometimes even seeking therapy. Novice dungeon masters will make bad D&D, and as long as it isn't toxic and they learn to get better at the craft, that's not only okay, it's necessary. But a lot of folks interpret no D&D is better than bad D&D to mean that if you aren't Matt Mercer, don't bother. Conclusion: with everything I've said, it's no wonder there's a shortage of dungeon masters in 5e. It's no wonder that people don't want to do it. Would you? I'm not going to do my usual closing, and instead I'm going to do a shout out. This shout out is for A Squirrel Plays. He gave me a shout out when I first started, and I thought I would return the favor. He's really close to having enough subs to monetize his channel, so please check out his channel, and if you like what he's doing, subscribe. And with that, I wish you a wonderful rest of your day.